The summer heat has risen and the clouds have pulled back to reveal a gleaming metallic sky. The crowd is growing restless. Beads of perspiration form on smooth brows. Hands push back silken locks. A mother's ever-watchful eye turns to her child clutching at her knee. The faint murmur of excitement is growing almost palpable. Names slip from mouth to ear to mouth and on through the crowds of fans. But there is no menace here. No fear of violence or concern that someone might be crushed in a rush for the stage. Instead, there's a kind of gentle pulse, like the throb of a racing heartbeat on the inside of a wrist. The murmurs and whispers slowly build until there are words spilling out from the throng. All eyes are focused on the microphone and guitar waiting patiently at center stage. Then there's a rustle of motion in the wings, and figures appear and begin to pluck out single notes from the shadows. Moments later, a woman strides out to the guitar, hoists its strap around her shoulder, beams to the audience, and shouts out, "Welcome to Lilith Fair." Let's freaking do this. Lilith Fair was the first touring all-female music festival founded by Canadian singer-songwriter Sarah McLachlan that ran from summer of 1997 until 1999. During the, we'll say, tumultuous time that was the 1990s, Lilith was a breath of fresh air that shattered the glass ceiling within the music industry. The fair was touted as a feminist, free love utopia focused on charity work and female collaboration during the heyday of the shock jock. Today, we seem to be living in an equally, if not more, unstable and terrifying time. So, what do you say we bring it back? In 1983, Sarah McLachlan released her third album, Fumbling Towards Ecstasy. The album, which sold over 2 million copies in the US, was set to tour the following year. It was common notion at the time that two women shouldn't be immediately next to each other on anything. A radio bill, a concert bill, what have you. When planning the tour, McLachlan tagged up-and-comer Paula Cole as an opener, and of course, met resistance. McLachlan was told by more than one booker that nobody would buy tickets if two women were on the same bill. Pissed off and determined, which is the prevailing ember that then lights the fire of Lilith Fair. This would not be happening without Sarah McLachlan having the personality that she has. McLachlan had Cole open for her anyway, which proved to be a massive success, and Sarah eventually decided to get as many female artists together as possible. McLachlan wanted to experiment, to test the theory that so many bookers had. The 1996 Mini-Fest, as I am calling it, saw headliners like Patti Smith, Amy Mann, Suzanne Vega, Paula Cole, Lisa Loeb, as well as, of course, Sarah herself. It was just a 4-stop tour, just seeing if it could work. And of course it totally did. We are officially off to the races. Sarah expanded the lineup, got some financial backing, lined up a route in charities, and came up with a name. The name Lilith Fair came from a conversation between McLachlan and her writer friend, Buffy Childerhorse, who actually wrote this book that I so lovingly slammed on the ground earlier. So sorry, Buffy. This is a great book, by the way. Highly recommend. Not only does it like really detail and have a bunch of interviews and great quotes from a ton of the artists who were there, it's intercut with these great little vignettes of little biographical info about different important women in history. And I learned about so many different women. Lisa Minter, never learned about her. Elizabeth Cady Stanton is in here. Highly recommend. Thank you, Buffy. I'm indebted to you. McLachlan had been toying around with naming the festival after Eve. But in this conversation, Childerhorse turned to Sarah McLachlan and said, "Have you ever heard of Adam's first wife?" Lilith comes from medieval Jewish folklore, more specifically the Alphabet of Ben Sirah, which is a satirical work that contains the first reference to Lilith. In the story, Lilith was created for Adam before Eve, but when she refused to submit to his authority, she ran off and started her own garden, which is, I just think is awesome. McLachlan called it Lilith Fair because she said she really likes the double meaning of fair. Fair meaning equal, fair meaning equality, and also meaning fair like a festival. So it's Lilith Fair. The more you know. When the fair opened on July 5th, 1997 at the Gorge Amphitheater in George, Washington, everyone could tell it was the start of something big. Someone who was in the audience that day was actually Brandi Carlile, who we may see pop up again later. Some of the headliners from the trial run came over for the official fair, so Sarah McLachlan, obviously, Paula Cole, Lisa Loeb, Suzanne Vega, and Amy Mann. And newcomers were the likes of Fiona Apple, Tracy Chapman, the Indigo Girls, Sheryl Crow, Sean Colvin, Jewel, the Cardigans, Emmylou Harris, and more. The lineup was rotating depending on the stop, and also it varied through the years. But eventually they'd bring on artists like Erykah Badu, Bonnie Raitt, Liz Phair, Natalie Merchant, Queen Latifah, Michelle Ndegeocello, Sinead O'Connor, and the Chicks, previously known as the Dixie Chicks, now called the Chicks. Lilith Fair was also cool because they had a B stage as well as what they called the Village stage. So the B stage was more for B-list artists. You maybe knew their names, maybe you heard of them before, but the Village stage was specifically meant for up-and-coming, lesser-known artists. Singers like Cassandra Wilson, Dido, Sixpence None the Richer, Nelly Furtado, and Christina Aguilera all had early performances there. McLaughlin said about the decision to add the additional stages, quote, "A lot of the main stage acts are fairly soft, so we're trying to make the B stage aggressive. I don't want it to be a folk festival, you know?" Unquote. She also had Pat Benatar play on the B stage, which I think is hilarious because I'm like, why don't you just... It's Pat Benatar. Put her on the main stage, but that also could be misinformation. While the headliners held closer to a songwriting focus as the festival continued, there was a widening of genre scene. After the first year, there was a lot of pushback, not only because it was a chick fest, or like a lesbian fair. It was a lot of misogyny. A lot of the pushback was just misogyny, but it was also being touted as the Lily White Fair because it did lack quite a bit of diversity, which McLaughlin took to heart, which is why, as the years go on, you see a more concerted effort for increased diversity in the artists. So it widens the genre, widens the amount of artists there, and allows Lilith to grow into what it's remembered as today, and what I think is the ethos that we should be bringing back. A huge focus of Lilith Fair was its efforts for charity. You cannot divorce charity efforts from Lilith Fair. They are the same thing. And when curating my own Lilith Fair, I thought this was a good time to bring up kind of the values that I wanted to bring forth, to have continue, the threads that will combine these festivals as it is cut of the same cloth. And this is what I think like the fibers are that make Lilith Fair successful and why I think it's needed. Number 1, a community focus. Number 2, female headliners and a focus on female crew. I will expand more on this later. And then obviously it's going to be charity oriented. The original fair did have corporate sponsorship. The first year included Borders Inc., which was a bookstore chain akin to like a Barnes & Noble. It served as the on-site music retailer as well. Borders also gave a portion of the CD sales of the various artists at Lilith Fair that they sold at their stores and at the festival to various charities supported by Lilith, like the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, or RAIN, and Lifebeat, which was an AIDS resource charity that utilizes the music industry specifically. Lilith Fair hosted these charities throughout the years, but also supported those like Amnesty International USA, the Sierra Club, and various breast cancer research organizations. They also hosted Planned Parenthood, which was a massive controversy at the time and was seen as incredibly radical. The announcement was met with protests and even a bomb threat in 1998, although the festival did go on as scheduled and everything was really fine. So safe to say, Planned Parenthood, gonna be number 1 on my list. They also worked with various local charities. Depending on the stop they were at, they would rotate depending on where they were, so there was a lot going directly back into each community. Additionally, McLaughlin pledged that $1 from every ticket sold would be donated to charity, which is something that remained true for all 3 years of the festival. With corporate sponsorship, however, McLaughlin has stated that they would not work with any corporations that did not also pledge to donate an equivalent amount to charity. The fair eventually dissolved after 1999, not because it lacked success, but because McLaughlin felt it had served its purpose. McLaughlin also cited burnout as a contributing factor to her decision to retire the fair, but has always left the door open for when it may need to return. And it did in 2010, kind of. 2010 was unsuccessful, unfortunately. McLaughlin wanted to revive the fair to bring together the newest, biggest female musicians in the industry, but it rang somewhat hollow in the new Obama-era landscape. The original point that Lilith Fair was trying to make was that women artists were successful artists, period. Not successful for a chick, not successful compared to a man or each other, just successful. So when it was 2010 and Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Katy Perry, Adele, Kesha, and Lady Gaga were some of the top performing artists of the year, the fair didn't seem to have much of a point anymore. By 2010, many people felt that, for the most part, the work was done. There was a general exhaustion following the harrowing economic crash of 2009, and a new hopeful era in Democratic politics was rising with the election of Barack Obama. That's a whole can of worms though. And the boom of the Me Too movement was still 7 years away. The 90s were a time when women had to scrape and claw just to perform next to each other. It was an era where people were more than comfortable flat out bullying women in the public eye for anything. Their hair, their weight, their shaving practices or lack thereof. Monica Lewinsky, a 22-year-old unpaid intern who had an affair with the 45-year-old married President of the United States, was being lambasted on national news, radio talk shows, magazines, blogs, weekly for her looks, her personality, her sexuality, absolutely anything. Paula Cole's unshaved underarms at the Grammys led to a number of tasteless Leno bits. The Grammys that year are kind of its own thing. They talk about this a lot in the documentary, which I think is really important because a lot of these women who were headlining Lilith Fair were nominated for Grammys, and they were all kind of lined up next to each other, and a bunch of them were nominated for Best New Artist or Song of the Year. And instead of giving these women their own individual spots for performances at the Grammys, they made Paula Cole, Sean Colvin, and Sarah McLachlan do a medley of their 3 songs rather than letting each woman shine on their own. It was like the chick medley. Women's music was considered a genre, and fat shaming and allegations of lesbianism, like it was a problem, were a normal daily occurrence both in real life and in mass media. The culture needed Lilith Fair. Women needed Lilith Fair. It carved a space for a sense of community that was non-existent in the mainstream zeitgeist. There were some more logistical reasons for the fair's failure in 2010. The original fan base had grown up, had kids, and moved out of urban centers. The music industry was going digital, and because of that, listeners' tastes grew more intersectional as it became easier to discover new music and create more diverse playlists, in contrast to Lilith's more condensed genre profile with their headliners. There were also complaints of high ticket prices. With rampant communication, poor marketing, and low ticket sales, artists were dropping out left and right. 10 festival dates were canceled the day before it was set to open on July 2nd, 2010 in Portland, Oregon, which is just not indicative of anything good, obviously. And this sucks because the lineup was awesome. Some of the originals were back. They had Sheryl Crow, Erykah Badu, Queen Latifah, and of course Sarah were all set to headline. They added big names like Miranda Lambert, Rihanna, Norah Jones, Sarah Bareilles, Marina and the Diamonds, Heart, and more. But the cultural need just wasn't quite there. McLachlan even admits that the intentions weren't as pure. It didn't embody the spirit of Lilith. It didn't have the same fire. Everybody felt like things were fine. Why did we need to have this chick fest come back that made all these waves and was so radical and really changed the industry? We just went through a major economic change, and all of these women are at the top of the charts. It doesn't really feel like Lilith has a place other than to make money for Sarah McLachlan, and that's just kind of how it read. This is kind of where this cultural disconnect is coming from, where this dissonance is really ringing. So, my plan for what I would want this festival to be. This is the criteria that I kept in mind as I was kind of building the outline of what I think this festival should look like. First of all, I do think we should center it around female identifying artists. I think that's important because when we're talking about building community, sometimes I feel like it's important to go really specific so you can speak to a wider cultural stance. And when I get into like the political causes that are going to be backed at Lilith Fair, I think it'll make a little more sense as to why I've decided to keep it to female identifying artists primarily. That doesn't mean there's no room for flexibility. And again, this is just me in my room saying, I think this would work, and me talking to my friends and being like, if we had a Lilith Fair nowadays, who would you want to see? So that's what I'm going off of. I do think it's important to keep the B stage and the village stage just to keep the diversity of artists really fresh and keep it nice and turned over, and also giving space for young artists to come up and share their music and have a good time and get in front of an audience and say, hey, oh my god, I performed at Lilith Fair. So the village stage and the B stage are very important to keep. Obviously, we're keeping the touring element. That's just kind of the format of the festival. Keeping the $1 per ticket going to charity. Keeping the extended healthcare for crew. They were the first tour to ever offer this, and I think it's really important to continue that. And then also, of course, having the charity booths. I'll get more into the specifics of that later. But at the center of all of this, I want to prioritize community in the lineup, in the charities, in the brands that are being worked with. Maintaining a level of value is really important because the original Lilith Fair turned down corporate sponsorships if it didn't align with their branding, or if it didn't align with their values, or they didn't agree to give X amount of money to charity. That's something that we're keeping as well. Corporate sponsorships if you have all this money, you should have some to give to people who really need it. So the budget. We're kind of talking more in loose terms when it comes to this budget, because the resources that were available to me, and more importantly, the information that I could not find, and there is so many variables that go into calculating an actual genuine budget for this, but I have factored in a lot of these decisions where it's important to cut costs, because we don't want ticket prices to be so exorbitant that like absolutely nobody can go, or it's inaccessible to the people who really want to enjoy this fair. And I'll talk about that kind of as we go through. My core Lilith fair that I'm going off of is like the baseline is the 1998 route, because I think that's when it was at the height of its popularity. It had really diversified its lineup. It's right smack dab in the middle. It's like truly the average Lilith fair between the three of what it would look like. And that was 57 dates with 47 stops. Now that was after they already had a proto run and they had a first full successful year. So they had upped it to 57 dates with 47 stops. We would be cutting that number down. It would mirror more the amount that was done in 2010, or that was planned to be done in 2010, with roughly 35 dates and around 25 stops, just until the demand is proven. And then you can always build in expansion with the lineup to add an extra date in Michigan. They did a ton at this one fairground in Michigan in 1998 because it's a great place for everybody in the Midwest to kind of go and gather. And it's a town that's inexpensive to stay in, and it could hold the number of people. So keeping that in mind, also only utilizing amphitheaters that have like built-in on-site staff and vendors. This is something the fair would always do. It's the most common sense way to go about this. If you were to go on as many stops as Lilith Fair does, and this is like kind of unprecedented. I really couldn't find many festivals that tour that the amount that Lilith did. The closest I could find, I think, is called Rock the Country, and it's a country music festival, and they do 7 stops with 21 dates. So Lilith Fair doing this many is just absolutely unprecedented. So utilizing amphitheaters would cut back on labor that would need to be hired day of. A lot of these amphitheaters already have running staff that work consistently for them. They're really big. They're massive. They can accommodate a really flexible amount of people over a long period of time. They have built-in vendors. They have built-in food stands. They have built-in bars. So they have the infrastructure pre-built into the venues, which I think is really important. The less we can outsource labor, the better. Also maintaining the stripped back, very personal feel between the artist and the audience, I think, is really important. Obviously, we're in an era where showmanship is really important. Coachella is happening as I'm recording this video, and Sabrina Carpenter had a chair that lifted out of a car and like 10 fountains going off. And I think that's awesome. I think it's so cool. And she had like 30 outfits and like 25 dancers and like a whole shifting set. Like it was a whole production. I think that's awesome. That's not going to work for this because accessibility and connection are the goal, but also we have to be realistic. So with the number of artists that we're expecting per day and that I'm kind of building this around, various set pieces, backdrops, pyrotechnics, things like that are not really an option. It allows for the more personal feeling, like I was talking about, you know, having somebody up there just with an instrument in their band, I think is what we're going for, but it also cuts back on labor costs for load in, load out, setup, tech. Everyone would have the same tech team. We'd have a core production crew that would travel with, and then you hire additional labor based on the city that you're in, which is great because it gives local people an opportunity to make some more money. It stimulates the local economy. Everybody kind of wins in that situation. We'll get to kind of the lineup later and why I think maybe some people who might be the first people you think of to play at Lilith Fair would probably not work for Lilith Fair in a realistic sense. Queen Latifah brought backup dancers and stuff, and I think stuff like that is definitely possible, but it would kind of be up to the discretion of the artist a little bit more and would have to fit within the parameters of what is technically possible on the stage. So for timing and also practicality, cost, etc., it has to be relatively low tech. So like I mentioned before, extended healthcare for the crew is something that I think is really, really important. In the documentary, the tour manager talked about how grown men were literally crying because they could send their kids to the dentist. And I think in this day and age, it's just kind of unconscionable to even think of hiring people for a long-term amount of time and not providing them with comprehensive healthcare. So that's something that we are absolutely factoring into a lot of these decisions. And obviously focusing on a female-dominated production crew is also very important and something that I'm taking from the original Lilith Fair. They hired a ton of women to work behind the scenes for them in a way that was unprecedented. And so maintaining that as we continue on into the future. Here's one of the bigger problems I was running into is that there are like no citations for how many people actually officially work on like a core crew for like a traveling music festival. First of all, because not a lot of traveling music festivals exist in this setup. I was able to estimate about 150 to 250 people for a core crew. I would anticipate on the higher end of that, and then about 100 to 300 local crew members. But then again, being able to staff out some of the work to existing crew members who work within the amphitheaters that we'd be performing at, I feel like it would strike a good balance. I feel like we'd be able to make it work. And just kind of an outline for what I was taking into account is like the actual jobs that need to be filled for staffing. Things that we would need to hire as like a Lilith Fair is production crew. So managing producer, light, sound, stage hands, etc. Site ops, which is like building and striking, or load in, load out, electricians, fencing and tenting for the charities and the backstage areas, etc. Artist relations, so like tour managers, hospitality, artist liaison, where are these people sleeping? Are they sleeping on the bus? And then traveling security. That runs along with the tour. Again, the benefit of amphitheaters is they typically have some kind of security element built in. Okay, so this is something that's I'm really interested in. Corporate sponsorships. So as I mentioned, Lilith Fair did have a few different corporate sponsorships. One of them was with Borders Inc., who ran all of their like merchandising. Some of the other ones that they worked with was they actually worked with Starbucks, and they did a traveling cafe on the tour. And they also gave 10% of any like merchandising purchases to various women's charities. And then Volkswagen was also a sponsor, as well as Levi's, the jeans brand. In 2010, they actually worked with the WNBA. That was one of their biggest corporate sponsors of that year. So some ideas that I was having, I do think reviving with Levi's is a great idea. It's a very like American classic brand, and the reason they were funding Lilith Fair at the time was because they were doing a large ad sweep with female musicians. And so I think Levi's bringing back that branding could be a really smart idea for them and also for Lilith Fair. And then they can give a bunch of jeans to the girls who are performing on stage, and they can strut around in their Levi's, and everybody's like, oh, she looks great. I want to get that. I like her a lot. I want to wear Levi's too. That's awesome. And part of why I think a Lilith Fair is really going to work is there's this desperate need for nostalgia, and everybody is going back and remaking things from 20, 30, 40 years ago because we're such a nostalgia happy public right now. Also bringing back the WNBA, I think that would be awesome and really fun. And then partnering with various girls sports initiatives, and especially when like trans women in sports are so just being so heavily lambasted right now. I think partnering with the WNBA and potentially working with charities for girls in sports and trans girls in sports, I think would be a great fit. Other ideas is Etsy's kind of on a big brand run right now and working with a ton of cool people and like designers and everything. So I feel like Etsy could run the merchandise and like e-commerce aspect, kind of take over the Borders Inc. aspect of things. Oatly could do a traveling cafe. Oatly is a oat milk brand that's really popular, and potentially working with Emma Chamberlain, who is a very popular, really successful influencer who owns her own coffee company and is opening various cafes across the country. I think it would be really cool to do an Oatly and Chamberlain coffee collab, because it's so, and then also you could use that for the social media marketing. They could have a backdrop and a pop-up, like, oh my god, the possibilities are endless. They could also partner with either YouTube or Hulu for live streams, lounges, interviews, and various press elements. YouTube I think makes more sense for live streaming and all of the other aspects of it. I think that would make a lot of sense, but also Hulu did do the Lilith Fair documentary, so I think they'd be first in line to be like, actually, we will be taking care of the live stream, thank you very much, because they do have those capabilities. So YouTube or Hulu I think would be great. And then in terms of like a beauty aspect of it, because this always pops up at Lollapalooza, it pops up at Coachella, and I think it would be really fun to have this here too. Partnering with Fenty Beauty, which is owned by Rihanna, who is a Black female musician, I think would fit so well into this. She was originally part of the 2010 Lilith Fair. I don't know if she ever actually performed. I didn't like exactly cross-check that, but she was one of the big draws for the 2010 Lilith Fair, and she's kind of been on a music hiatus, so I think this would be a great way to involve her in the festival again. That's also very cool stuff. Now, some of the charities I definitely want to work with. There would be a few constant ones, and this was true of the original Lilith Fair. They had multiple that would travel around with them, and then they always worked with various local charities. That was the thing that changed, I'd say, the most from stop to stop, is exactly what charities they worked with, just because it was also indicative of of where they were. So some of the constant ones, which will be chosen based on previous partnerships, and also I factored in ones historically supported by some of the artists I wanted on the lineup, just because I thought that would be nice and seamless and maybe give a little more incentives to some of these artists. So some of the standard ones I think would be Planned Parenthood, the Trevor Project, which is supportive of LGBTQ plus youth, RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network that I mentioned earlier, and then breast cancer research as well. Some other ones that are supported by some of the artists that I think would fit well at Lilith Fair are the National Network of Abortion Fund, Transgender Law Center, and Support and Feed. The areas of focus for a lot of these charities that I think we'd want to kind of dial in on are women's rights, immigration support, pro-peace, anti-gun, and LGBTQ plus support. Those are a lot of the themes that I noticed in the original Lilith Fair, and I think all of these are the modern equivalent. And then, of course, have the rest be local, but it splits the focus a little bit, and it stimulates local economies. So that's kind of the logistical element, but I think we can get to the fun part. I want to talk about who's going to be there. I really don't want to flex, but I got this on eBay for $10. Can you see it? Is it focusing? Lilith Fair guest, baby. I better be. No, I'm kidding. Okay, welcome to the simultaneously most organized and least organized section of this video essay. There are so many incredible female artists that I feel like would in some way fit this festival, and I think they could be made to fit the festival, but I'm also trying to keep in mind parameters and the kind of the vibe that we're trying to start out with. This has always been a very malleable festival. So the way that I've broken it down, I have lists of performers from the original Lilith Fair that I think should in some way make a return. I have a list of guarantees, so both those from the original Lilith Fair and modern day artists that I think would literally saw an arm off to do Lilith Fair. And then I have our list of just general modern artists that I think are a good idea. I do have a couple that I do not think would work, that I think might be obvious put-ins that I feel like I have to mention because it will be glaring if I don't mention them. I also have a list of some ideas for B stages, and then I have some like classic old school female musicians that I think should show up, that either did show up at Lilith Fair previously, a lot of these, I'm looking at my list right now, a lot of these did, or I think would just make a great addition. And then I also have them grouped by potential lineups. So I grouped it into 5 because if we're doing 25 stops and 35 dates, it's just easier to just 5 is a great multiple. It's so nice to have 5 of something. First, I'm going to talk about who I think would not work for Lilith Fair, at least right now. Number 1, Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift will not be at this festival. I am a lifelong Taylor Swift fan. I grew up absolutely adoring her. These last few years, I haven't been as pleased, but that's just me. She's also the most famous that she's ever been in her entire life, which I think is crazy for somebody who has been astronomically famous since they were like 19. It's insane. That's kind of the problem. Taylor Swift is so astronomically famous that she would eclipse anything that the festival already would be. And Sarah McLachlan actually already made a really good point in the documentary. Lilith Fairs nowadays, because of the original Lilith Fair, kind of pop up in their own ways. And the first example that they gave was the Eras Tour. Everybody was trading friendship bracelets. You were making costumes months in advance. It was a huge community building opportunity. Like, it was something that was really, really cool to witness. I did not get tickets. I sat outside the United Center in Chicago, but that's okay. I'm not even mad about it. I also, it pains me to say this, I do not think Sabrina Carpenter would work this time with where she's at in her career. But I think in a couple years, if she wasn't celebrating having 2 really incredible albums and a really successful long-running world tour, I think she'd be great, but just not right now. And then Ariana Grande, same kind of thing. I think she's so production focused, and also she's kind of in her acting gig right now. My friend Capucina is going to be so sad that I have her on this list. I don't think as of right now she would work at Lilith Fair, but that does not mean none of these women couldn't ever do Lilith Fair. Taylor Swift, I think it would have to be like 30 years. Like, she'd have to be grown a little more. So in terms of some 90s Lilith girls that I think should come back, see, Jewel is a contentious figure because she sang at an RFK Jr. rally and her fans were not big fans of that. So she's like a maybe, but I think it would be a little insane to fully exclude her because she was such a big part of the festival. Sarah McLachlan, obviously. This is going to go without saying. Sheryl Crow, Paula Cole, Jewel. Erykah Badu, Fiona Apple, Indigo Girls, Missy Elliott, Natalie Merchant, Sean Colvin, Queen Latifah, Michelle Ndegeocello, Lisa Loeb, and Meredith Brooks. I feel like those are the 90s girls that we should get. I wish to God Sinead O'Connor was still with us, but unfortunately that is not the case, but I think a beautiful tribute to her would absolutely be done. Some guarantees. These are people who would absolutely saw an arm and a leg off to be there. First of all, Lilith Fair does not exist without Sarah McLachlan. Sarah McLachlan will be there. Sheryl Crow, I think, as well. Cheryl and Sarah are really incredible friends and were during the entire time of Lilith Fair, and Sheryl Crow was so gung-ho for this festival. Same with Paula Cole and the Indigo Girls. In terms of modern artists, Brandi Carlile, she said her first concert was the opening night of Lilith Fair at the Gorge in Washington, and she's interviewed in the documentary. It was so formative to her personality, she would have to be there, and she'd be a perfect fit. I also think, again, because she was part of the documentary, she's such a modern-day synthesis of like so many of these women. Olivia Rodrigo, I think, would be the Sarah McLachlan of the current artists, in my opinion. I think Sarah McLachlan might slightly disagree with me on that, but I also think I make a really good case for it. And the only reason I say that is because when Sarah McLachlan was on Amy Poehler's Good Hang podcast, Amy Poehler asked her, who do you think should headline Lilith Fair if you did it today? And she immediately said Phoebe Bridgers. So that's the only thing, is that Phoebe Bridgers might be the modern Sarah McLachlan, but the thing is, Olivia Rodrigo, I think, has more of the showmanship and the personality to kind of step into what Sarah McLachlan really did for the festival and really take it as an engine and run with it. Not that I don't think Phoebe Bridgers would do that, but I think it just kind of goes more with Olivia Rodrigo's vibe, and I think she'd jump in with 2 feet. And when I say Phoebe Bridgers, I and also Sarah McLachlan are saying that with also boy genius in mind. Lucy Dacus and Julian Baker. Just keeping that in mind. I'm just gonna read out the modern artists. I may cut this. Some of these I did include in the grouped lineups that I made, but there's so there's so many that I think would be really good, and so I just want to list all of them. So here I go. Lily Allen, Clairo, Doechii, Olivia Dean, Lizzie McAlpine, SZA, Biba Doobie, The Marias, Muna, Audrey Hobart, Gracie Abrams, Florence and the Machine, Ella Langley, Mitski, Chapel Roan, Renee Rapp, Suki Waterhouse, Lorde, Susan Tedeschi, Ethel Cain, Adele, Ray, Fiona Apple, Miley Cyrus, Billie Eilish, Lana Del Rey, Pink Pantheress, Kesha, Brandi Carlile, Zara Larson, Hayley Kiyoko, Marina and the Diamonds, Lei, Hayley Williams, Aurora, Megan Thee Stallion, and Norah Jones. And that's just some of them. I'm not saying, like, disagree with me if you want. The headliner list was done after various interviews with multiple friends, multiple older women. Lilith Fair is for everybody, but I was interviewing my peers for most of it. Just keep that in mind. So B stage some people I'd really love at B stage, and it also just gives you an idea of kind of the different artists that can pepper that stage. Cornelia Murr, I love Cornelia Murr. Joy Oladokin, Julia Jacklin, Wet Leg, Saint Evangeline, The Last Dinner Party. Those are my girls. That's what I want on the B stage. But obviously, there's room for everyone. I'm not even going to touch the Village stage because that is so niche. And if you look up the set list for the Village stages, it is like 75 performers long. It's ridiculous. So that's something, again, populated by a lot of local artists and smaller up-and-coming artists that are kind of pulled out of thin air, it almost feels like. So that's going to be more flexible. And also for the sake of time, I figured we would just not worry about the Village stage. Some like classic female musicians that have either shown up at Lilith Fair before or who I would just think would really fit well at the festival. Joan Baez, Joni Mitchell, Stevie Nicks, Bonnie Raitt. Just can't get better than that. So these are my groupings. These are my 5 mini lineups that I put together. I tried to keep them relatively varied. Realistically, I think it would be Sarah McLachlan and Olivia Rodrigo, or Sarah McLachlan and Phoebe Bridgers / Boy Genius as consistent headliners. I wanted to get more people in the mix and just kind of explore all the different possibilities and like all the different groupings, and I think it's fun to just put people together. So I tried to balance it between modern artists, original Lilith Fair artists, and I tried to vary the genres as well. So, and these are in no particular order. This is just kind of how I put them together. We can see how I did. But group 1, Sarah McLachlan. Group 2, Sarah McLachlan. Group 3, Sarah McLachlan. Group 4, Sarah McLachlan. Group 5. I also kept in mind, I'm like, what women do I want to see all sing a song together at the end of the night? Because that is one of the greatest traditions of Lilith Fair. The Indigo Girls got everybody together and they were like, what if we just sang a song? Every single show, they closed Lilith Fair. They got all of the main stage artists together on stage. They all learned a song and they would perform it together at the end of the night with everybody. That's awesome. That's kind of the shtick with my lineup. And here's the thing. I'm not planning this in delusion. Hulu made an entire documentary about it, and then immediately after, Sarah McLachlan went on Good Hang with Amy Poehler and has been doing this entire press run, obviously promoting the documentary. But I think she's also kind of tilling the soil for a revival of the Lilith Fair. And so I just wanted to throw my hat in the ring. So why now? I've been mentioning it throughout, but we live in a deeply unstable time. Not to blame everything on this guy, but Donald Trump's ascendancy to the White House and a general cultural shift towards conservative politics have been a total body blow to everyone that isn't male, straight, white, cis, and a billionaire. Progress was undoubtedly made socially for women's rights, specifically during the Me Too movement, but we've taken what feels like a million steps back since then. For the love of God, Roe v. Wade doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't help that social media, which was once meant to unite and connect us, is proving to drive further wedges between an already fracturing society. When I watched the Lilith Fair documentary on Hulu, Building a Mystery, I burst into tears. No less than 10 times, and I am not a big crier. It hit the nostalgia chord for me. After all, as a Gen Zer, nostalgia is my favorite drug, even for a time I wasn't alive. I did exist really close to Lilith Fair, technically. I'm just gonna take that. I was born in 2001. But when I was reflecting on what exactly made me so emotional about this documentary, rather than my raging jealousy for the fact that I wasn't there, I realized it wasn't just a desire for what feels like a simpler time, although the rampant explicit misogyny would have been probably too much for my 2026 self to stomach. It was a desire for connection with a diverse group of like-minded individuals in a way that was joyful and fun and felt safe that I really craved and felt like I was missing out on. Protesting is an important part of activism and has proven to enhance a sense of community in those attending. There seems to be a cycle that is repeating itself that I think people are growing quite tired of. Horrible thing happens, mass protests occur, then people talk about how mass protests have occurred, and then nothing really happens. People want to tangibly help. Protesting is just the most accessible way to do that, or it seems that way. While protesting is great for making voices heard and fostering a sense of belonging, a lot of people, me included, can often feel more powerless after the fact. And I'm not obviously trying to disparage protesting. I think it's an incredible thing to do. I think it's part of one's civic duty to protest. If you're unhappy with the way you're being governed, those who are being governed need to speak up and say something about it. Decisions are made by those who show up. Unfortunately, it's just getting harder for us to be in those rooms. What we think is some massive change, because we see these record numbers of protests since the Black Lives Matter movement. I feel like the size of protests in the progressive sphere have only gotten bigger. Protesting is something that's dignified and beautiful and amazing to do, but sometimes I feel like you want to make your voice heard while having fun and doing it in a way that you know tangibly, monetarily makes a difference. Aligning charities so closely to Lilith Fair, as is the festival's history, can allow for joyful protests to coincide with genuine change, as sometimes protesting feels like its momentum can stop at the water's edge. Money is important for progress, unfortunately, but so is community. Creating a prolonged, communally focused festival, I think, can make some genuine change, form new relationships, and help with consciousness raising, while raising money for organizations that will support members of our broader community when government won't. At the original Lilith Fair, attendees talked about the freedom they felt in the arms of the festival. They could see themselves in each other. They were reminded that they weren't alone. And for many of the young girls in attendance, literally gonna cry, they saw a future for themselves previously thought to be radical or unattainable. Why not? In a time and place in world history that feels so volatile and hopeless, carve a space for younger generations to see that their futures are worth fighting for. That we are worth fighting for. Women are the keepers of cultural history. Hell, just Google the word gossip to discover that women talking to each other, women supporting each other, women protecting each other, and doing the same for those in their community have been the connective tissue of our collective existence. The success of our species, the proliferation of our species is quite literally thanks to women. I think it's time that we get a cultural reminder that our stories, women's stories, human stories, should be celebrated. And what better way to tell a story than through a song? Well, if you've reached the end of this, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Lita Sizer, for being just an absolute force and the most brilliant person I've ever met in my entire life and being such an incredible professor. And thank you for giving me the freedom to do this project. This is hilarious and so much fun, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it the entire time. So just thank you for just being awesome. This will be my bibliography section. Hopefully my bibliography is scrolling by. I am also gonna say thank you to Sarah McLachlan for being fucking awesome and starting this way back in the day. Truly, we would be lost without you. Also, the Hulu documentary was a huge help and a big, it was the reason why I did this project. I do highly recommend watching it. It is so fascinating because I'm pretty positive I'm going to be posting this on YouTube. Leave a comment for like who you'd want to see, how you think I can improve on this plan, because again, this is just me screaming at a camera in my room. And like I love music, but I like to say that I'm not picky and I listen to a bunch of different things. I'm just a comfort listener, so it's hard for me to get out of like the niches that I find myself in. So please help me expand this. Also, I do think including like obviously non-female artists, I think is a good idea, but I think they can't be cis straight men. That's really it. I think Lilith Fair should be for everybody that isn't a cis straight man. And is that so bad? Thank you so much for watching. Bye.